So if can I request everybody to just please hit mute for yourself during the time of the presentation. Good evening, everybody. My name is Shweta Arya. I am the Executive Director of Delaware Interfaith Power and Light. We are a faith-based environmental nonprofit based in Delaware. We are one of the 40 state affiliates of National IPL. And our shared mission is to take bold and just action on climate change. And we really believe that climate crisis is a moral crisis. And Climate Conversation Program is funded by Energize Delaware. Energize Delaware is a state-funded nonprofit. And you can check it out on their website. They support nonprofits, residences, and businesses become energy efficient and climate resilient. We're very thankful for this partnership. We have done over 60 of these climate conversations so far and have engaged over 2,500 people in the last few years. So some of the conversations have been smaller, some have been on bigger, some have been online, some in person, but the goal of these climate conversations have been to create awareness about climate change, how climate change is impacting us, our health, our well-being, and how it will impact our future. But we also are changing the narrative from gloom and doom to something that is hopeful, full of solutions, and creating that acknowledgement that we can solve climate change together. We also understand that we're running out on time on climate action. Climate science is clear that by 2030, we must reduce our carbon emissions by half. And this is a challenging goal, and we can't achieve this goal just by government can't solve it for us, individuals alone can't do it. When we all work together, we can do it. So, and business sector can play an important role in achieving that goal. So we have done climate conversations on many topics, but we've never done anything like this before, engaging the business sector. So we're very excited about this conversation tonight, listening from business leaders themselves of what do they think about climate change, what kind of risks and opportunity does climate change present to them, and how do they think about tackling it. So today's climate conversation, we're co-hosting this with Citizens Climate Lobby of Delaware, Delaware chapter, and I would like to now invite Beth Chases. She is the Delaware State Coordinator for Citizens Climate Lobby, and I'm so thankful to you, Beth, for helping me arranging all the panelists and putting this together, writing the press release and everything. We're always great to partner with you. So I will hand over to you. You can take a few minutes to share what Citizens Climate Lobby is all about, and then you can invite our moderator. So it's all yours.
Well, thanks, Shweta. It is always great to work with you too. I have been involved in Citizens Climate Lobby here in Delaware since 2016. And now I'm the state coordinator leading our newly united single statewide chapter here in Delaware. We used to have 3 chapters, but found that we were working together more often than separately. So we just decided to go for it. And in this age of Zoom, we can easily coordinate our actions. So we have about 600 members here in Delaware, and we come from all political persuasions. We're a nonpartisan organization whose goal is to create the political will for a livable world. A lot of times that means working with Congress. That's one of our main focuses. We do lobby our member of Congress. We advocate with them, maybe is a better word, to pass effective policies to prevent climate change from getting worse. And I'm really pleased to introduce today a member of our national staff. from Citizens Climate Lobby. He's going to be our moderator today. And his name is Kyle Kameen. He serves as the manager of stakeholder engagement and government relations in the Washington, D.C. office of Citizen Climate Lobby, where he focuses on building the coalition of businesses who support policy goals of Citizens Climate Lobby. And Kyle has worked for 5 years in Washington, primarily on the government relations staff of the Home Depot. So he does have lots of experience in business. And most recently, he managed their political action committee, grassroots communications efforts, and lobby days. And he also worked in several policy areas, including taxes, transportation, trade, and financial services. And all this before joining CCL, I think it was now a couple of years ago. He grew up in St. Louis, Missouri, and graduated from St. Louis University with a BS in Business Administration and Economics. And he is currently pursuing his JD degree at George Washington University Law School. So as Kyle will introduce the panelists, you may notice that my name in the corner of my window here says "Ask Me." My role during the remainder is going to be to sort of moderate questions in the chat. So when it comes time for audience Q&A, I'll be gathering common questions and things like that to pose for our panelists. So thanks, everybody. Enjoy the conversation. Take it away, Kyle.
Thank you, Beth. Kyle, before you take it on, I just want to, I have a couple of slides that I forgot
Please.
about sharing.
Okay.
Please.
And let's see if I can do this. No. All right, let's try one more time. Can everybody see it? No. Okay. So before I invite Kyle to take over the panel discussion, I just want to share this survey that was done by Deloitte, and it just came out a couple of weeks ago, which was powerful numbers. They surveyed around over 2,000 business leaders from 24 countries. It's a global survey. And some of these survey answers were just so powerful. You look at the numbers. To what degree do you expect climate change to impact your company's strategy and operations over the next 3 years? In total, 97% of business leaders thought that it really impacts their company's strategy and operations. They really need to seriously think about climate impacts. And then there was.
This
Well,
is.
I need that to rest. I'm gonna skip tonight. No.
No, this isn't working. That's a shame.
All right. And this was just another slide that I prepared out of that survey. It said, what does your organization see as the most pressing issue to focus on over the next year, ranked in order of importance? And climate change comes on the top, right after economic outlook, which was very interesting. So I just wanted to kind of share that that survey with you, and I can put it in the chat box if anybody's interested in taking a look at that. And Kyle, I also had this pretty slide of that. So if you want to use that to introduce the panelist, take it from there.
Yes, absolutely. Thank you so much, Shweta and Beth. It's a pleasure to be here today. I know that CCL has worked with IPL in a few places, so it's a great relationship that we really value, and we just appreciate you giving us the opportunity to be a part of a great conversation. I know we have 4 terrific panelists today who are going to do a great job sharing kind of their perspective on the intersection of climate and business, where there's opportunities, risks, and everywhere else in between. And so with that, I would like to begin by introducing our panelists. I'm going to go one by one. So I'll introduce one, give them a few minutes to share a little bit about themselves and their business. And then when they wrap, I will move on to the next one. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and kick it off. I'm going to start with Cora Castle. Cora is the president and CEO of Omnipotential Energy Partners, and we're just really happy to have her joining us today. So take it away, Cora.
Oh, thank you so much. First, let me thank Kyle, Shweta, DIPL, Beth, and the CCL for your invitation to be here tonight. I'm super thrilled. My name is Cora Castle, and I am president and CEO of Omnipotential. I have an undergraduate degree from University of Delaware College of Engineering. I have 30 years of professional experience in technology, integration, and design. I have lived in the Delaware area for my entire adult life. If you were here very early, you heard that I was raised in Anchorage, among other places. My mom liked guys in uniform, many of them. But at Omnipotential, we believe that very few people will purchase a vehicle that they can't conveniently fuel, regardless of what its sticker price is. So our mission is to make it not only possible, but practical, convenient, and affordable for anyone to own an electric vehicle through home fueling. Even in communities and zip codes that haven't traditionally been associated with EV ownership. And here we're kind of talking about communities with lower home values and communities with either street or lot style parking. So these are communities that make up about half of society, but are not well suited to electric vehicle ownership, mostly because they are not well suited to home charging. So we've designed an award-winning product to charge electric vehicles that we deploy at our expense to curbside areas and residential communities for shared use by anyone who lives in the area. We own the hardware, and EV owners basically pay us a monthly fee for a block of usage time that covers, most of Americans' monthly driving habits. Use of our product extends the usable range of EVs. And in addition to that, it saves EV owners about $3,500 per year in vehicle ownership costs, including fuel and maintenance. And because necessity is the mother of invention, I also happen to be a state lobbyist, which I suspect we may end up talking about my experiences in that regard a little bit later in the conversation. But again, Cora Castle, I'm so thrilled to be here.
Well, thank you, Cora, and I think it's probably evident to everyone that your business ties directly into kind of the EV adoption movement that we're seeing in relation to CO2 emissions and climate change. So we look forward to learning more about your work. With that, I'm going to go ahead and introduce Matt Wampler. He is the CEO and co-founder of ClearCogs. Matt.
Thanks, Kyle. I appreciate you having me. Yeah, my name is Matt Wampler. I'm the CEO of ClearCogs. And look, we help restaurants reduce food waste. At the end of the day, 40% of all food is wasted. And I think that people would be surprised to find out that food waste actually generates more carbon emissions than the entire airline industry. It's a really big problem when it comes to the environment. And when we look at restaurants in particular, 10% of the food that comes in the back door never even makes it to the customer. And that's a really big problem because that's not just food waste, right? It's not like an apple that fell from the tree. It's stuff that's been heavily processed, gone through an entire supply chain, delivered, right, prepped, baked, and then thrown away, right? It's the worst kind of food waste. And ultimately, the way we view it is restaurants don't want to have this problem. It's bad for their bottom line. It's bad for the environment. And ultimately, it's something they want to solve. But like all efficiency problems, they're not that easy to solve. So what ClearCogs does is we work with restaurants and provide, AI predictive forecasting tools so that they are given those numbers on what to prep, proactively. So they're not having to do extra work. It's a very simple process. And the net result is we're able to cut roughly 60% of their prep waste and reduce it by 60%. So anyhow, Kyle, thank you very much for having me.
No, thank you for joining us. I think that angle of the food waste / agricultural, CO2 component is one that doesn't get enough attention, but is a huge problem when it comes to emissions and the climate solution. So I think you're a very innovative angle on that, and appreciate having you today. So look forward to hearing more about that. I'm going to go ahead and move on and introduce Ian Harris, who is a business development manager with Block Power. Ian?
I appreciate it, Kyle. Good evening, everybody. Ian Harris from the Block Power team. Very fortunate and excited to be here this evening to engage on this great opportunity. Our goal at Block Power is quite simple. It's how do we make buildings greener, healthier, and smarter? How do we force and collaborate with not only the building owners, but with municipalities, utility companies across the entire country to electrify all the buildings, to get them off of their fossil fuels. At Block Power, we're looking to analyze, finance, and install all electric technologies in communities across the entire country. We're fortunate to have executed a number of projects from the Menlo Park Bay area of California to Denver, Colorado, to the greater Atlanta area in Georgia, as well as Pennsylvania and the greater New York City area where we call our home base. I appreciate it, Kyle.
Thank you, Ian. I know that the building electrification and efficiency area is a hot topic in policy right now. And so I think you guys are right in the thick of it with all of the incentives and everything that just came out of federal policy. And it's definitely going to be a huge trend moving forward. So look forward to hearing more about your work. And with that, for last but not least, our final guest tonight is Bill Stuff. Bill is with the Western Michigan Sustainable Business Foundation, or Forum. Bill?
Yes, good evening, everyone. It's a pleasure to be with you. I am not representing anyone in particular, really. I've retired about 3 years ago after 45 years in the environmental business. For along the way, I've worked at nonprofit organizations, manufacturers, engineering consulting firms. The last 20 years, I had my own sustainable development consulting firm called Sustainable Research Group. And we worked primarily with manufacturers, but not exclusively. One of the things that we were involved in during the early part of that ownership was helping the office furniture industry develop a sustainable product standard. And it was a multi-attribute standard. It covered 90 different aspects of environmental stewardship. A major part of it was energy and greenhouse gas. And we were, whether you, depending on your perspective, fortunate or unfortunate enough to introduce these concepts to about 150 to 200, mostly medium or small sized businesses that had never thought too deeply about these issues, but were competing with larger companies and had to keep up with them. So looking forward to the conversation tonight. And the question answer session later.
Well, thanks, Bill. That sounds like a lot of work that probably wasn't very easy to, really move small and medium-sized businesses who don't have a ton of resources to commit to those kinds of new concerns. They have plenty to start with. So I think that experience, we all look forward to hearing more from that experience in the conversation tonight. Well, with that, for our audience's knowledge, we have some prepared questions. I'm going to run through those. Each of our panelists will have an opportunity to, answer the question and share their perspective. And then once we've run through those, there will be plenty of time for audience Q&A, as Beth outlined earlier, and she will, feed me the questions, so to speak, when we get to that portion. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and jump into our prepared questions. I'm going to start, each one of you is going to get a turn to go first, since we have 4 questions. That works out perfectly. So for the first one, Matt, I will start with you. As outlined by Shweta at the top of the event, we're here to discuss business engagement related to climate change. It's a hugely broad topic. You touched a little bit on what your business is doing on the food waste side, and this varies for every organization. Can you speak to the reason your organization, think business needs to engage in climate, or how they might with relation to, sustainable practices or waste reduction practices?
Yeah, and it's kind of funny because it's entangled in the whole idea of running a more efficient business, right? So like we really don't look at them that dissimilarly, right? So they kind of stay together, right? It's like when we make things, we run a better business and we run it more efficiently, it's also better for the environment in our case, right? But one of the things that I think has changed recently that has been really helpful was, awareness. So food waste is one of those things that you don't think of as like, burning fossil fuels, right? So the idea of, oh, you know what, it saves me, let's say $10, right? Like I save $10 in food. That may give some motivation to a restaurant, but the idea of like, oh, by the way, like this is really bad for the planet and I'm saving the $10 gives that extra motivation. So, I really think a lot of this is about awareness, right? Awareness on like what a difference it can make.
That's a great point. And I think we see a lot of that in just kind of general polling about climate. More and more people are aware of the problem. Ian, I want to come to you next. Can you talk to a little bit about the reason your organization thinks it's important for businesses to engage in climate?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, just to give more of a historical context, our CEO was exposed to the inefficiencies of living in a pre-war walk-up in Brooklyn, where his family itself was actually experiencing inefficient, unreliable heating sources, where unfortunately they had to rely on their own gas stove as a heating source. Now, when you look at this from a broader sense, I mean, you're talking about the impact on indoor air quality, when you talk about just the quality of life issues that may arise. That was the reason why our founder and CEO, Danelle Baird, started BlockPower itself. Now, moving where we find ourselves today, some 30, 40 years later, there's a greater impact. I think more and more people are keenly aware about the adverse effects of fossil fuel burning and the effects it's going to have on not only our lives, but also our children's lives. So as an organization, we have continued to push forward with the hopes that all will recognize the importance of electrification and transitioning off of fossil fuels, but also look at it from other aspects. It's a great opportunity for job creation. It's a great opportunity for the reduction or the improvement of indoor air quality. And then when you talk about a sustainability moving into the 21st century, I mean, this is a new market where hundreds, if not millions of people can be impacted positively.
You just touched on, thank you so much. You just touched on, the word opportunity, and we're going to talk about that more later, but I have a feeling that that'll come up a lot in our conversation today, that, it's a lot of, I think as Shweta said earlier, there's a lot of doom and gloom in the climate conversation, and for good reason,
Sure.
But that there's also a lot of opportunity out there. So Cora, can you talk a little bit about that from your business's perspective?
Oh, sure. I mean, so I began my business 3 years ago, and I did it as a direct result of, wanting to do something substantive, different. I used to work in, the banking sector, and I decided I wanted to do something that was more meaningful. And it was very clear, climate change is not a theoretical problem. Climate change is real, right? It's important to me as both a business person and as a person that there should be healthy places for our children to live, right? And it really is coming down to that. It's the second time that's been said in the last minute or so. But the thing is, very little economic opportunity exists when your home and your business and your children's school are literally underwater or on fire. Taking a business-focused approach to climate change should be as natural as purchasing insurance, right? It's on the horizon. It's not only on the horizon, but the climate change is in our yard now, right? Most people can see the effects of it. The truth is that as far as business opportunities go, change, whether it's from climate change or economic change or any kind of change, is the source of real opportunity, right? Substantive and large scale change is rarely brought about by a single individual. It's hard enough to do important things when everyone works together, right, from the top to the bottom. But to address the glaring needs of climate change, we really need to encourage innovation in the green sector in everything from product production to product packaging.
Yeah.
Like the only way we get there is by bringing many and diverse brains and thought processes as possible to address the issues of, technology, sociology, economy, education, housing, employment, and, so many other things, right? So it's really just going to take so many people. And the great news is that anytime that there's a lot of change, there is, and this is no exception, right? The times that we're living now, this is no exception. There is a lot of economic opportunity that can be grasped by people, even people without formal business training, right? It only takes an idea and a willingness to devote yourself to that idea, right? And we have everything to look forward to in terms of health outcomes and environmental improvement from my business specifically, because our business is focused on electric vehicles, which it has a direct impact on not only energy consumption, but on air quality, that's water quality, and so many downstream effects of air and water quality. So, we really just think that there are very obvious business cases out there, and all you have to really do is look for them, and you can find them.
No, absolutely. I think you just pointed to, this is a cumulative and comprehensive problem, and that there's going to be a role for everybody to play, and there's a role for business to play as a result. Absolutely. Bill, I know your experience might be speaking more to from the client side when you were working with your clients as a consultant, or whether it's through the forum now. Can you speak to the reason you think businesses should engage in climate, or what you were hearing from clients when you were doing the consulting, how they were looking at the issue?
Yeah, now keep in mind that most of my experience was with medium and
Absolutely
smaller size manufacturers, usually from 50 staff up to 1,000 staff in that region. So we're not talking about the Fortune 500 types of companies that Deloitte surveys.
Sure.
And hate to say this, but 95% of them, they only did anything with environmental, social, or governance standards if they thought it was going to increase sales. And so that was the motivation. But once they got into it and realized the spin-off benefits, then they became believers and started believing in some of the benefits that they never realized.
Yeah.
For instance, just simple things like they all knew exactly to the penny when we first started with them how much they spent on energy.
Sure.
But if you asked them how much they used, they had no clue. But they could tell you down to the penny how much they paid the utility. So where did it come from? How did you get it? What source was it? Start digging into those kinds of things like that. So, I think most companies, when they start doing that, they realize that there's huge opportunity to improve the quality of their operation. There's a lot of $100 bills laid on the floor that they never realized because they never looked.
Right.
And
it was about helping them see the business case is what you're saying.
I think we're getting to the point now where companies are doing it now because they pretty much have to. If you're going to survive through the transition that we're going through right now, from the old world to the new world, you have to pay attention to this stuff. The people that don't pay attention to it, those companies, they'll be carcasses.
Well, I think that points to, the innovation and opportunity that has kind of been the theme so far. And with that, I think that's a great way to pivot into our next question. And Ian, I want to bring this to you first. I think as we've all been acknowledging repeatedly, the risks and opportunities for businesses due to climate change, we hear a lot about the risks. Outlines, can you talk a little bit about the risk, but particularly the opportunity that your business identified and is, kind of looking to address or take advantage of through the market?
Yeah, absolutely. I think just continuing what Bill referenced or sort of brought to our attention is regarding the actual dollars, right? I think at the end of the day, a lot of people feel it in their pockets more than anything. And if you talk about something that will either drive them, pull them, or move them in a certain direction, if you can address it from a bottom line perspective, I think you have a better opportunity to engage with them on an opportunity to move them forward. I think we've also realized through the work that we've done over the years is that sometimes climate change within itself could be a very loaded word to some.
Yep.
So for us being able to appropriately engage with various customers across this country and be able to find that middle ground, is it a job creation opportunity? Is it a workforce development opportunity? Is it an opportunity for you to save on your bottom line? And at the same time, we have to be mindful that we do have a lot of customers that are building owners and operators. So it's more than just the bottom line. Sometimes it's also about operational efficiency. How can they improve their building? How can they continue to compete in the open market? And you have new construction that is coming up. And then also, sometimes it's also the opportunity for them to alleviate headaches, right? You could say, like, now that my tenants are happy, no longer are they complaining, no longer are they, reaching out and saying that my windows are drafty or that my heating system is inefficient. So I think there's an abundance of opportunities, but certainly the appropriate messaging, the appropriate avenues or tools that we leverage to communicate this information is going to be key to the success.
Yeah, I have to say the messaging piece is certainly something that, we at CCL, in an effort to be nonpartisan and meet people where they are and have, that is a challenge. You have to understand where people are coming from and try to listen. You can't always, lead the conversation. And that's a big thing. I couldn't agree more that you have to meet people where they are, and the language you use can really change the direction of a conversation when it comes to a topic like climate change. There's no question. Cora, can you talk a little bit about the opportunities? I know you touched on it some already, but dive into a little bit more of the risks or opportunities that your business saw and is kind of leaning into.
Yeah, absolutely. So, it's a pretty common metric. It's pretty commonly known that transportation is the single largest contributor to greenhouse gases in the US. About 27%. It's followed closely by electricity generation and industry. Modern EVs use about half the energy to drive the same distance, and that would dramatically reduce the lifelong carbon footprint of every single mile traveled by every single American. But the problem is that, and here we go into the opportunity, these benefits are really only realizable by about 50% of Americans who have access to private parking, such as a garage, where they could reliably charge an EV overnight, right? It may or may not be, everyone in this call may or may not be aware, but public EV charging is inconvenient in the extreme. It is time consuming. It can take anywhere from a half an hour to 60 minutes to charge an electric vehicle in public, depending on how much charge you had when you pulled up and how high you're going to charge your battery to, right? So this is 50% of the American fueling business is obviously a huge environmental and commercial opportunity, right? To serve fuel to half of the country that can't conveniently charge at home and absolutely will not charge in public, right? So now in our case, as a use case, our risk is that in order to effect the changes necessary to allow these types of communities to charge where they live, that road goes straight through pretty much every city hall and through county administration buildings. And the risk here is, of course, that there's around 22,000 of those offices in the United States, right? So this unfortunately, this approach is particularly laborious. And it's just going to require a lot of work with municipal governments, with county governments, because as it turns out, curbside residential electric vehicle charging is something that by and large there are no permits for today, right? So that municipalities are having to build those policies out as we speak. And we're watching this happen real time. We're actually at the front line of this fight, which I think, again, probably will come up later in the conversation. But the main thing is garages are really the premium housing feature that enables convenient and affordable EV ownership. And lots of people obviously just don't have those. Lower cost housing communities without garages are about to miss out on the economic advantages that EVs provide. And the real problem here is that this is going to worsen the generational wealth gaps for these communities, right? We know that communities with lower home values are communities that tend to get saddled with generational wealth gaps. And so what we're really trying to do is bring an affordable product into those communities to make sure that they're not, sort of left holding the technological sack, right? And driving dirty, loud, expensive vehicles while other communities get to enjoy the benefits of electric.
That's great. Thanks for outlining that. And I think you touched on something that is hard, I think is not necessarily extremely well understood in general, which is you mentioned the permitting piece. And there's kind of a federal discussion happening right now about transmission and permitting around clean energy and how do we make the clean energy transition happen. But there's also a lot of NIMBYism that plays a role in that. And that boils all the way down to the state and local level, where it can really be challenging to permit very small things that at scale can make a big difference. And you're fighting one of those battles right now and pointing that out as, a risk or a challenge in your world. So thank you for outlining that, because I think it just goes to show that, these things all come down to the state and local level very often. Bill, I think for you, I'm curious, you touched on a few of the opportunities, such as as you referred to them, $100 bills lying on the floor, that you were pointing out to some of your clients. Do you have some other examples of some of the opportunities or risks that you were helping, these small and medium-sized businesses identify as they were evaluating how to, operate more sustainably or climate friendly? You're muted. Bill, you're muted. There you go.
Okay, sorry.
No problem.
I'm just getting over a bout of COVID, so I cough sometimes. Anyway.
Well, glad you're feeling a little better.
Yeah, thank you. I wanted to give credit to that quote to Amory Lovins at the Rocky Mountain Institute. I said that 20 years ago. I had an opportunity to follow him on an audit. But companies, again, medium-sized companies, they're in chaos mode all the time. I don't find them doing a lot of long-term planning, strategic planning. They're trying to get product out the door. They've got emergencies all over the place. So it's really hard for them to concentrate on things, but the opportunities are enormous. The biggest one is just continuity. With extreme weather conditions that climate change is going to bring, they're unevenly distributed. So it's going to be different everywhere. Everyone's going to have multiple major disruptions to plan for. So risk management, if I were still operating a company today, risk management and continuity planning would be the top of my list to do, to find out where the weak points are. Where's your weak points in your supply chain? Where's your weak points in your staffing? Where's your weak points in your communication systems? Because it could be a hurricane, it could be 140-mile straight winds, it could be flooding, it could be anything. So when that happens, how do you maintain operations in a way that your competitors can't? And that's just good planning.
It's a good point. And as you mentioned, as these get worse, climate change is playing a role in that. And so it behooves businesses to do what they can to mitigate climate change if they can play a role to avoid some of those potential consequences. Matt, last but not least for you on this question, you touched on it a bit on the food waste side. What are your thoughts as far as, kind of the opportunities your business sees here?
No, it's, for all businesses, I was sitting here thinking about that. And, both the biggest risk and the greatest opportunity is everybody on this call. You all vote with your dollars, right? And, especially when it comes to like consumer purchased goods and restaurants, right? Like the risk is that you don't vote with your dollars for those businesses. And the opportunity is, we look at younger generations. And they are way more sensitive to this. They are way more on top of it and educated, and they choose where they go based on values. And so I think that's one of the big long-term, in addition to all of the wonderful answers you guys gave. Yeah, I think that, you guys are you are the risk and you guys are the opportunity.
That's an excellent point. I do certainly think consumers can do a lot to point in the right direction, point businesses in the right direction. Well, for our third question, Cora, I'm going to start with you. As you have touched on a couple of times through your own efforts, businesses, one of the ways that they can engage is with public policy. That can be through stakeholder engagement, or it can be direct engagement with public officials and legislators. At CCL, historically, we're an organization that has worked on carbon pricing policy. We also work on a number of other climate policies, but that's been kind of our North Star. How has your company had to engage with policy, and how do you think carbon pricing policy specifically would interact with your business or industry? You're muted.
So first question first, let me uncork the bottle on our public policy engagement. So the very nature of the problem of electric vehicle ownership, again, revolves around EV charging. If you can't conveniently fuel a vehicle, you won't own it, right? There's no point in owning it. So that really means that for the community of people that I've already described, you have to bring service to them. So that means basically curbside electric vehicle charging in these on-street parking areas, lot parking areas. So as it turns out, because there is no public, or there was no public policy to allow or describe how such a thing might happen, no products were being manufactured to fill that need, because there were very few places in the country where they could be deployed. So our entire business model is surrounding these two cohabiting problems of there's no product because there's no policy, but there's no policy because there's no product. So we knew that we had to get both of those things off the ground. So what we did is, we worked with a number of legislators. We drafted legislation that would ensure that EV owners in Delaware would be able to receive permits for curbside residential EV chargers. And yay us, our legislation was actually signed by Governor Carney in June of 2021 and goes into effect on
Congratulations.
July. Thank you. And it goes into effect on July 1st of this year. And I will take a moment to crow that it was passed with a supermajority and bipartisan support. So it is, so we really feel like it's an idea whose time has come, right? So, so other things that we do. So how did we manage to do that? By the way, I have zero public policy experience. I don't have a degree in public policy. I had never so much as visited the Capitol building before. So how did I manage to do that, right? So what I did is I identified elected officials that I could get behind, and I supported them. And just like anything else, right, you get things by giving things, right? And which should not suggest a quid pro quo, but you become, when people are aware of you and your mission, that makes it much easier for you to make your voice heard. And I will say that we're also very fortunate to be in Delaware, which I think many people here might be aware of the term the Delaware effect. Basically, if you know anybody in Delaware, then you become known by basically everybody in Delaware. It is very easy to have an outsized voice in the state of Delaware. So we just routinely started visiting events by our elected officials, making ourselves known, introducing ourselves, showing up. You have to show up. If you show up, people will start understanding who you are, and it becomes much easier to sort of not just engage in public policy, but understand the people who are making it. Because, when people think about policy, they always think what's going on in Washington, but the truth is what's happening down the street from your house is so much more important, because you have the ability to directly impact that. As far as carbon pricing goes, I think that carbon pricing is likely to have a number of short and long-term effects that are going to be different by geographic region. I think that it's going to be very easy to take advantage of carbon pricing if you, for instance, live in an area with high wind, or you're involved in a company that is involved with wind farming, or a place where the sun tends to shine all the time.
Yeah.
I think that in areas that do not happen to enjoy a lot of renewable energy, I think that unfortunately there's likely to be an upward force acting on energy pricing in those areas. But my hope is that, you know, we can look, it takes a village here, right? We have to improve the grid, make it easier for us to transmit energy all across the country, including Texas, especially Texas.
You mean you don't want them to have their own grid anymore?
Well, I mean, I don't want them to freeze anymore.
Yeah,
That's important. So, so
reliability.
that's a little bit about our particular engagement with policy.
No, thanks. It's terrific to hear your story. And you know, congratulations again on your success. That's great. Bill, I wanted to come to you next. I know your perspective again might be a little different, whether it was clients that were engaging with public policy, or maybe it's the Western Michigan Sustainable Business Forum that's, you know, worked with the community or something like that. Do you have some examples of that work? And if you want, we can come back to you in a minute. You're muted again.
Well, I'm sorry, last part of your question.
And I just said, and if they had some examples of, maybe it was through working with the Western Michigan Sustainable Business Forum, working with the community.
Yeah, a couple of things. The nonprofit sector, like the Sustainable Business Forum, they're very good at surveying their members and finding out what the members' needs and wants are, especially in the areas of energy efficiency, and you know, preferences to governmental initiatives. So that's one thing. And then the companies themselves, the ones that did, you know, made the most progress, is they found someone within the company that was qualified. Usually it was an engineer, but it didn't have to be, that volunteered to be the lead energy person. And they sent that person to training. I mean, normal engineering school doesn't teach you how to read a commercial bill from the utilities. You know, you have to have a PhD usually to do that. So that's just the beginning. You know, are they getting charged at the right rate? Where's the low-hanging fruit in their organization? Pardon me.
Right.
If they do see an opportunity within the company, you know, how do they know that they're not getting hoodwinked by a contractor that comes in? You know, so how do you manage projects on energy and energy reduction, energy efficiency, in a way that you know what's going on? So those are a couple things that I've seen in the past that have really made a difference. And sometimes if there've been very small companies, they've banded together and hired an independent engineer to work for all of them at once. So they just spread the cost that way.
That's great. Thanks. Matt, I know in our previous conversation, you said that a lot of your organization focused on stakeholder engagement when it came to, policy and the like. So can you talk a little bit more about how you all have focused on the stakeholder side as opposed to the legislator side, and what you think if like carbon pricing works well in that format or not?
Yeah, no, I think it's easy to throw sticks and stones at, businesses. It's a lot easier to just be, they need to do something about that. But, really, actually, when you want to have real change, it's about meeting them where they are. Because like Bill said, I mean, it's chaos for a lot of these businesses. I mean, I ran restaurants for 10 years, and I didn't have staff. I'm just trying to keep my head above water. I'm not doing carbon pricing, like that's not the world I live in. And if you expect me to, like, I'm probably going to fail at it. So I tend to lean far more towards education, right?
Yeah.
Resources. I think that the punitive side of that, for restaurants, they assume when they think of sustainability, they think of paper straws that cost them twice as much, the customers don't like, and like they get shamed if they don't use, right? It's these like flashpoint things, right? But there's so many things that are really practical that they can do that they're just not aware of. Compost your food waste. Makes a huge difference, way more than the plastic straw side of things. I'm not saying plastic straws aren't, but like,
You're fine.
we have this weird warped sense of reality that just isn't factual. So I tend to think that if you educate the population on like these are the things that are important, they will go look for the solutions to solve those. They just don't know.
I think that's a great point. You mentioned education being a component, but just also resources and bandwidth. And I have to say, even working with larger companies and even sometimes trade associations, climate isn't necessarily in their day-to-day portfolio. While it impacts a lot of things they do day to day, they're thinking about how are we going to pay this bill? What's our tax bill going to be at the end of the year? How can we change trade policies so that we're, getting things through the ports more efficiently? Those are the things, their day-to-day business that they're most focused on. And so, as you said, meeting them where they are. In a lot of the conversations that I have, it's not about like, let me tell you what you need to do. It's like, let's talk, let's get to know each other. Let me hear what your problems are. Let's hear our perspective. Let's see where we can find a way to work together on maybe not this particular climate solution, but one that we both support and can move across the finish line. And so I think you make a great point that education and understanding what the challenges a business is facing are a huge component of that conversation.
And I will tack this on. So I'm very passionate about reducing food waste. It's something that we focus and harp on every day. And I just want to say to everybody that's listening in on the call, like, it starts with you guys, it ends with you guys. Like, more than half of the food waste and the carbon emissions from food waste is consumer driven. It's throwing things out in your fridge. It's over ordering. It's all that stuff. You have the ability to make a really big impact in this. There's some things we can do on the restaurant side and the grocery side, right? But like, at the end of the day, this is about individuals, and each one of you has a part to play.
Well,
I'm probably preaching to the choir that you guys are all here. You already know it, but I feel like I got to say it.
No, it's constructive. Thank you. Well, Ian, you're last for this question. How's Block Power engaged with public policy, whether that's stakeholders or legislators or both? And how do you think carbon pricing would interact with your business or your industry?
Yeah, appreciate it, Kyle. Thanks for allowing me to engage on this question specifically.
Oh, please.
Block Power, we're fortunate to have founders that come from a community organizing background. So we reference and acknowledge the power of collective, organized, effective communication and how that can drive the conversation through or to electrifications and getting off of fossil fuels. It's part of our everyday part of our business. I mean, our policy engagement has grown over the years, and it's everything from the engagement that we have with the City Council in New York City, with the Mayor's Office in New York City, to the Biden administration, to municipalities across the country. And I think what we're trying to educate, inform, and collaborate on is referencing and acknowledging that, policy is only one aspect of the engagement or of the puzzle. There are so many other players at the table as well that have to interact collectively and efficiently to allow us to move in the right direction. So, policy is only one aspect of it, but the policy should not be a burden. I think we can all acknowledge sometimes that the policy has a good intentions, but the execution in terms of getting it out to the people and allowing the people to adapt and to interact to allow themselves to be successful with electrification, with decarbonization, is challenging. So how can we make that more applicable and easier to move forward? Now, when you talk about carbon pricing and sort of that engagement, I think what we've seen to date is, fortunately, New York City and the state of New York and the state of California and Massachusetts are sort of leading the way in regards to the opportunity for monitoring, the opportunity for understanding what people's usage is, but then also putting in timelines, benchmarks, right? Okay, collectively, we're in agreement that over the next 5, 10, 15 years, that, we're attempting to move in the right direction. So, it's a twofold of saying, yes, long-term perspective, long-term planning, these are our goals and objectives, but there is a need at all times to be nimble, right? To adjust the policy as you deem fit, to adjust as you see the market is reacting accordingly. So again, policy is important. Policy is definitely a key aspect of all of our engagements and the work that we do, but the importance of making sure that policy is applicable, comprehensible, but also nimble is key to our success.
That's a great point. And nimble policy is difficult, especially if you're doing it at the kind of macro federal level, because it is hard to change policies once, especially if you're going by the rule promulgation process or something along those lines. It is difficult. And so it's important that stakeholders like Block Power are engaged early and often to make sure that that policy is as well designed as possible. Because as you point out, sometimes the best intent can still lead to a problematic or difficult policy for many stakeholders. So thank you for sharing that perspective. Well, this will be our last question for prepared question, and then we'll move into the audience Q&A. This last question, I'm going to go ahead and start with Matt again. Given that this can vary by industry, I'm going to open up the aperture a little bit more here. What kind of climate-related policies that are currently in place, or would you like to see to help businesses like yours engage in climate change? What kind of policies would be beneficial?
Yeah, so this is not my world. So I'll just be frank up front. Like, I spend a lot more time trying to meet customers where they are than we do in the policy side. I think one of the interesting developments though on the policy side is mandatory composting. The big effect for food waste is the fact that it ends up in a landfill. And I don't know all of the chemical side of it. It's really bad. Like, if you compost it, not bad. So, this mandatory composting is really effective. There's a lot of knock-on effects though, right? Like, so now I got a composting bucket in the middle of my restaurant. I got to have somebody pick it up. Like, is it really getting followed? I don't know the details on it. So I'm going to kind of bow out of this one.
No, that's actually, though, I just learned something. I didn't even know there were mandatory composting policies
California,
going.
the entire state of California is now mandatory composting. I mean, like, it's I want to say Massachusetts as well. It's a trend that's catching on. I think that what I love about America is it's just a big laboratory. So, like, some states are going to try it, some counties are going to try it. We're going to see how it works, right? And like, I just like the fact that we're out there trying to figure these things out. But I do think at the end of the day, it's like, the millennials and the Gen Zs out there that are like, look, I'm not going to this because, they are a big polluter. And like, this is somebody that has my values. Like, that is why restaurants are changing. It's really powerful. That's what the CEOs are talking about.
The laboratories comment that you just made, I think it's Justice Sandra Day O'Connor who used to say that the states were the laboratories of democracy. So I believe she was the one. I may be crediting that to the wrong person, but no, it's a very well made point, and they do give us the opportunity to see how these policies can work in action before you really try to scale them up. Bill, I wanted to jump over to you. When you look at your work with the forum and with your clients, what kind of climate related policies do you like that are currently in place, or would you like to see to help businesses address climate change? And you're still muted, I think. Yeah.
So I'm a fan of lead by example. So anything that local, state, and federal government can do to incentivize the right direction, no matter what that is beneficial. Because what I've seen in my career is the Polestar companies, the companies that understand what the true important issues are that have to be dealt with, they will grab a hold of those opportunities quickly. And once they do, then there is a a steady march of their competitors, trying to figure out why they're doing that. What do they see that they don't see? And all of a sudden you get a whole train of companies taking advantage of those incentives. So there's a lot that the local, state, and national governments can do. Just like what happened recently at the federal level, where we're just starting now to see, some potential benefits of having infrastructure funding for the first time in, I don't know, 25 or 30 years.
30, yeah.
And what that's going to do to the country, and for green energy, and for energy conservation. So I've never been a policy person, but
That's right.
that's the kind of policy I like.
No, that's a great point. I think the incentive, as you pointed out, incentives are attractive to businesses, and that markets will move towards those incentives if they're properly structured and well designed, as Ian pointed out earlier. And Ian may be able to touch on this a little bit with their work, but as you mentioned, Bill, the IRA that recently passed had a lot of clean energy and energy incentives, and those are going to just now starting to kind of be, the rules are being promulgated or written about how that'll come out. So it'll take some time to really see the benefits, but I think you'll see the opportunity that it might move markets for a lot of industries and businesses. So with that, Ian, I'm curious, generally what kind of climate policies does Block Power like that are currently in place, or would they like to see to help, businesses address climate change specifically in your industry or in others?
Sure. Appreciate it, Kyle. And I think, a lot of the other panelists have already alluded to it or touched on it to date, but I think what we've seen in some of the leaders from a state perspective, I think the state of New York, the state of Massachusetts, the state of California, it's a twofold, or it's a two-pronged approach, right? It's not only sort of like a carrot, but it's also the stick method, right? So it's, you have a runway of 10 to 15 years to make a transition. Yeah. Simultaneously, we will incentivize it to hopefully expedite that transitional process. One thing that I haven't heard tonight, and I hope that we can speak about frankly, is equity and access through this entire process as well, and how important that is for the success of the works that we are attempting to execute on. I think a lot of times the policy is very appropriate, but again, going back to the appropriate structure and its implementation is very different. And if we don't have components that include equity access, I think we're going to be losing out on not only a lot of opportunities, but we're going to be making a transition and leaving many behind. So I think, through this process, what we've seen to date is, it's a carrot and a stick method, right? We give people an appropriate time frame and runway to make that transition, but also reference and capitalize on those opportunities of what are the incentives? Is it a incentive that's specifically for the purchasing of the equipment? It is an incentive specifically for the overall project. What is that, and sort of what is that structure to the success of the project?
That's terrific, and thank you for hitting that equity and access component. That's absolutely, couldn't agree more. From in our organization, when we kind of look at policy and evaluate policy, we often think about trying to make sure, we say nobody's left behind in the transition. The truth is that there are a lot of people that already don't have equitable access. And if you're going to transition to, kind of a new economy, in some ways, energy economy at least, the expenses related to that transition are hard to bear for a person with average means, let alone somebody with less already. And now do we leave them even further behind? I think you're spot on with that. And how do we make sure that doesn't happen? So thank you for highlighting that. That's just a terrific point. Cora, same question to you. What kind of climate related policies do you like that are currently in place or would like to see? And I think, there's an equity and access component to your business model, kind of as you've been talking about it, given that, not everybody has the means to have a garage or even, access to those parking areas. So please jump in.
Yeah, so in terms of, policy that concerns me a little bit, and this is kind of focused on our business. One of the things that concerns me is that there's a lot of foot dragging on municipalities and areas of municipalities that are historic. So historic areas are being effectively stonewalled for a lot of green tech. So like for instance, you know, you have to get inefficient wood single pane windows that were, you know, that are period appropriate for the homes in a particular district, you know, that, you know, or, you know, we're not going to allow you to install home solar because you're in a, you know, a historic district. I mean, you know, I really think that municipalities need to give very serious consideration to, you know, whether those communities are really well served if, you know, the people who live there are forced to live under extreme climate conditions. And, you know, and to a certain degree, those policies basically keep people hostage by disallowing them to take advantage of opportunities like electric vehicle ownership, convenient electric vehicle ownership, and, you know, home electrification through photovoltaics. So I think at a local level, I think I would really love to see more chatter statewide, you know, stateside, how we can sort of raise the historic communities so that they don't have to sort of continue to live in the era that their homes were built. Nationally, I mean, I of course I would love to see a national version of our curbside residential EV charging legislation. I think that would be fair and wise. I mean, we frankly, we see very little downside in allowing, you know, curbside residential done right. Other things that we would really love to see at a national level is, you know, one of the classic problems with electric vehicles is the effect on the grid. People are concerned about peak demand and, you know, and that's a valid concern, right? If everybody went out and bought an EV and everybody plugged them in at the same time, the entire country would crash. So, you know, one of the technologies that people are very, very eager to explore is what's known as vehicle to grid. So we would really love to see expansion and standardization around vehicle to grid. I'd love to see a very serious national effort made to turn electric vehicles from a net drain
to a battery.
You know, a net drain on peak power demand to a battery that can actually reduce peak power demand. I think that's very, very important. And finally, I think from a national policy perspective, I really believe that we need to focus on improving the grid. We really need a grid with manifest destiny, so that we can avoid many of these regional problems like power overloads in section. I mean, there are places in the country right now that have capacity to, you know, to provide power to thousands and thousands of more homes, but they have to shut down capacity because they can't, because the local grid simply has nowhere to move that power to, right? So we really need to invest, I believe, in improvements to the grid. I think that's a huge thing for sustainability.
I'll get off at 7.
Yeah, no, thank you. That's a policy that we work on. I work on permitting and siting reform related to the grid. It's a sticky wicket, but you know, that's one that definitely needs to be resolved if we're going to make this electrification transition, both on the EV side, but also on the home side, as Ian was discussing. And I think what you pointed out with regard to the historic districts component, this is an example of kind of the trade-offs, right? Like we have to change our mindset about, is it more important to preserve that home's, you know, historic integrity with the inefficient windows, or to make the home adapt to the current environment that we live in and still maybe keep the look and feel, but have an efficient window? And how do those policies, how are they at odds, and how can we kind of line them up more appropriately? And that's going to be the battle at the state and local level and at the federal level for the foreseeable future. We'll be having those kinds of trade-off conversations in policy.
And like what economic opportunity do we gain by examining some of these opportunities as well?
Sure. Well, I promised that we would have time for Q&A, and we have about 17 minutes left, so I do want to jump into it. Beth, do we have some questions that you can share with us?
We do have some questions, and some of these are probably more directed toward one or two panelists, but I will start with that, the obvious places, and then if anyone else wants to jump in and answer, that would be fine too. I'll start with one that's probably prompted by comments that Matt has made about consumer power and influencing businesses to go in a more green direction. Lisa has asked, how much of a factor is client, customer, employee pressure to adopt and implement environmentally friendly practices? And then I would add to that, what is the best way for consumers to register their preferences with the businesses they frequent? Because they may not know that you are not frequenting them and spending their, your hard-earned dollars at a business for environmental reasons unless you tell them. So what is the best way for consumers to make their preferences known to? Let's concentrate on like local small businesses here at first, like your local restaurants or small stores.
That's a really, really good question. And, I'm sitting here thinking about it. As far as letting them know, a lot of this is really local, right? Like if I'm running a restaurant, I'm the general manager of a restaurant. I kind of know my customers, right? It's just asking questions like, hey, is this something you guys think about? Is this on your radar? Like, believe it or not, like those stick with restaurant operators. They're used to, irate customers and all that kind of stuff. But when somebody comes in, it's like, hey, is this something that you're aware of in a non-threatening way? Not like a, hey, you better be doing something like this. Like, when it's a trusted colleague, not a colleague, but, trusted, customer that seems unbiased, like I think that really registers with them. So yeah, it's really local. As far as how much it drives behavior, a lot. And I would say on the employee side, a lot. Like that's what these people think about. It's and I think that the slippery slope is the greenwashing side, where it's like, oh yeah, we're doing all kinds of great things for the planet. But like my talks with CEOs of restaurants and restaurant groups are all kind of like, we see the next generation. We know what their values are. They're doing research on this stuff. Like if we don't get with the times, you're kind of struggling. So, yeah.
Yeah, that's one thing that as we thought about this panel and organizing it and so forth, that we often wanted to include some, say, larger mainstream business that say employs a lot of people in Delaware, and we have a few of those here in Delaware. That has a terrific environmental policy or climate policy, energy policy in place for their company, but they are unwilling to talk about it publicly. So
I sympathize with that, by the way, right?
Yeah, right. So how can we as consumers reassure them that these are good things and we'd like to know about?
If you figure that out, please let me know as well, because it's something we wrestle with every day. We don't bring up sustainability with restaurant groups purely because, for some, it really does matter. But for a lot, it's got a really negative connotation. So like, it's about meeting them where they are, speaking their language. Their language is, I need to run a more efficient operation, right? I need to cut costs. I need to streamline operations. Like, great, we've got a solution for that. By the way, if you'd like it, we're also helping reduce, your carbon footprint. Feel free to advertise it, right? Like, so, yeah, if somebody has any good feedback for us, we would love to hear that as well, because it's tough.
I think that a number of business owners are feeling a little bit stung, right? Because there are a healthy number of organizations out there that are effectively selling environmental snake oil to people who are just trying to pump up their environmental street cred. Not people, but companies trying to pump up their environmental street cred. And, I think companies are feeling a little gun shy now, because they're really taking I mean, they're looking at green opportunities, I think, under a microscope, right? Just because there's just so many of these, environmental, snake oil salesmen out there that are selling, that will happily take companies' money to deploy a solution that is even the information on the box is not going to provide the benefit that they're going to claim that it is, when they're trying to make a sale.
I'm in agreement with Cora on this, right? These are complicated issues, right? And it feels like whatever decision I make, like I thought I was doing the right thing, I get in trouble, I do this, I get in trouble. It's like, I just, I'm staying away from it for now. Yeah.
I think there are ways to slice and dice that big problem into more manageable chunks. And there's this, it kind of borders on risk management and strategic planning, but there's a technique called stakeholder capitalism. So not shareholder, but stakeholder. So a shareholder is anyone that has material interest in what you're doing. And you have to figure out what's material for your business. So you ask your stakeholders. That includes customers, employees, regulatory agencies, newspapers, whoever's interested in you, and you ask them a series of questions. What's important to you? Then you sort those out, and you get a well-rounded understanding of at least the most important direction to head in.
Yeah, but climate's one of those like negative externalities. We're like, look, it's somebody else's problem. Like, yeah, it's not highest on my list. Let's, it's not quite as simple as that. Like the employee says, I want a raise, right? The customer says, I don't want to pay $10 for a sandwich, right? Like so yeah, I'm sorry. It's
No,
tough.
I agree. I think everybody has made like great points on this, and it's something that I run into in conversations all the time with businesses. They're weighing, like, if they can still do things that are right for their business and for climate and just do them quietly, that's how they want to do them, because that's the way that they continue to make their business sustainable, that they continue to do the right thing from like the global, climate perspective, and stay out of trouble in like the public eye. And so it's a trade-off. It's definitely a trade-off, and some see it as more valuable to be public facing than others.
I will throw one last thing out, Beth.
Okay.
I plug for a company that we've worked with in the past, Green Places up in New York. They do carbon accounting and marketing, and they help really like frame these issues in the right way, because this is something that comes up so frequently.
Can you put their contact information in the chat for
Yes,
people who
ma'am.
might be interested in that?
Yeah, and then I also want to just add quickly one point. I feel like, it is also more for bigger businesses who also have a bigger carbon footprint. They also share a bigger responsibility to take that action and lead by example, where small businesses are, like Bill said, they're already struggling to kind of, get their operations together and make it profitable. So I feel like it's definitely more, shared responsibility for those bigger operations. But then I think when some of the smaller or newer, more innovative businesses like, Curbstar or ClearCogs, if your mission itself really solves those issues, then you're doing your part by just, innovating and solving these big environmental problems. But, whichever way, I feel like, businesses really drive the economy. They are problem solvers, and it's just great to hear all these stories, how, when you connect and push policy just a little bit, if you are able to, it really helps. So I just want to, I know we are on top of the hour, so I just want to put in the plug for how appreciative we are, like, at Delaware IPL works in collaboration with lots of other environmental partners in Delaware, and we appreciate how faith sector can play its role. Environmental partners can play its role in pushing that policy. So we also want business community to own their responsibility and working together with us if we want to really make big progress on climate policy. It's really coming together and working together on policy really helps everyone. It's just not one sector cannot solve this urgent problem. So I appreciate everyone's thoughts on this and what you brought to this discussion. And maybe at the end we can just go around and have your closing thought for this panel discussion, like one thing that you would want to, have a kind of a giveaway thought to anybody who's joining us today for this panel discussion. One last thought from me. The other one, and Cora, do you wanna start? Oh, you muted.
You broke up on me a little bit there at the end. Can you describe what you're asking again?
Oh yeah, sure. No, I maybe as the closing thought, if everybody can just share their last closing thought with our attendees before we close.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think that it's everybody's responsibility. I mean, climate change belongs to all of us, right? Every single person on this phone call owns a tiny fraction of the damage that has been done, right?
Did you use it?
I'm sorry?
You haven't used this yet, right?
Yeah, so everybody owns a tiny fraction of the climate change, the damage that's already been done, and the carbon that's already in the atmosphere, right? That hasn't done damage yet, but will, and there's no way to avoid it. So it is. I think it's everybody's responsibility to get out there and promote policy that moves the needle in the correct direction. Especially if you have grandchildren and children or grandchildren, and you want them to have a safe and climate secure future. It's everybody's responsibility to get out there, whether you have an economic or business idea, or whether you don't, right? So it's that same old saying, like those who can do, those who don't teach, right? So those who can need to get out there and do it, and those who can't need to get behind other people who are doing it.
Thanks, Cora. Bill, you're next on my screen. Do you want to share?
Yeah, I'd say the business focus of this session has been fantastic. I would encourage you to keep doing this on a routine basis and pulling in the solution providers like you have tonight, and maybe some local assistance kind of folks that are involved in this on a day-to-day business, helping companies. Because even if you're a solution provider, if you're manufacturing something, you have the same problems as the dirty gray industry. You've got the same issues to deal with. You just have a green product at the end. But you still have a manufacturing process, you still have a supply chain, you still have everything else. So look at what can be done, and this is a great format for doing it. Thank you.
Thank you, Bill. Ian, you want to go next?
Yeah, I appreciate everyone's participation. I think, as Bill alluded to, making sure that we have the service providers to have these incredible and useful dialogue. But I would say the time is now. This is not a time for us to sit on the sidelines. This is a time for us to participate. And it starts with everything from it's where you live, it's where you work, it's where you pray, it's where you eat, it's where you're educated. I think every aspects of our lives are engaged or interacted in some sort of building or some sort of built area. So, how can you have a clear understanding about its energy usage, its opportunities for improvements, and hopefully getting off of fossil fuels. So again, the time is now.
Very well said. Thanks for that tone of urgency, Ian. Nat.
All right, I'm gonna get creepy on everybody for a moment. All right, so we live in a world of data right now. So we're a small startup. We process 200 million data points every night. And, with our AI stuff, and we're not McDonald's, we're not McKinsey, We're not Coca-Cola. Like, they are watching everything that's going on throughout the data. So the reason I bring that up is the things that we think no one notices, right? Whether we throw this in the trash or it goes in the recycling, whether we decide to buy product A or product B, these are all being monitored and watched, and they are absolutely making data-driven decisions based on your individual behavior. So like, everything matters, and like, it, even though no one's watching, like, you might be surprised, like, they're paying attention.
Well said, Matt. Thank you so much for participating in this panel. Kyle, Beth, thank you so much for joining us tonight. And Beth, you want to share anything, last thought, and maybe Kyle?
Well, I just want to thank everyone for joining us tonight, both our panelists and our audience out there, and wish we had time to get to all the questions. I know particularly, Cora, there was a number of potential EV owners out there who want to ask you a bunch of things about how that's going to work. So so sorry that we didn't get to more questions. But we will try to keep on doing this in the future, and hopefully we'll have more opportunities to address some of these pressing questions that are important to all of us.
And
Thanks for having us, Beth.
Yeah, thank you so much, Matt. I'll be also following up with the recording. We had 75 people register for this event, and I know that a lot of people didn't make it. So I will share the recording, and if it's all right with all the panelists, I can share your information. So if people have questions, they can always reach out to you. And lastly, Kyle, if you have any closing thoughts for this panel before we.
No, just thank you for the opportunity to be here with everybody, and thanks to the panelists. You guys were great and easy to work with and really insightful. So I appreciate everything you shared tonight, and it's honestly kind of great to see such innovators and opportunity for business to address, climate change and kind of change the economy. So thanks so much for sharing what you did today.
Thanks for saying I was easy to work with. That never happens.
Thank you so much for joining. And I just want to say that our next climate conversation will be on food waste. So stay tuned, and I'll be sharing more information. All right. Thank you so much. Have a good night.
Thank you.